It seems counterinstructive or counterintuitive to say that a corruption scandal can be a positive story. Yet that is precisely the point that Caolan Robertson is making from Kyiv, and he is right. What appears at first glance to be a moment of national shame is in fact evidence of a political culture that refuses to normalize wrongdoing. It reveals a society that has developed an instinctive intolerance for the old habits of the post-Soviet era. That is the essential distinction between Ukraine and the authoritarian state waging war against it. The facts are stark. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office have uncovered a large-scale bribery and kickback scheme at Energoatom and related energy infrastructure projects. So while people, as Caolan puts out, while people are cold in Kyiv, there are these elite oligarch types who are profiteering. Tens of millions siphoned off, laundered through bags of cash and front offices orchestrated in part by figures connected to President Zelensky's old business circle. The energy minister, the justice minister have resigned. Timur Mindik, a businessman close to Zelensky in his pre-political career, fled the country hours before investigators reached his door. And all this at the moment when Ukrainian cities are enduring hours of darkness and cold under the relentless Russian attack. Yet what matters is not simply the wrongdoing, but the response. In Ukraine, scandals are not buried. They provoke protest. That's the right thing. They provoke parliamentary pushback. That's the right thing. They provoke ministerial resignations. The right thing. They provoke a president who, whatever his flaws, cannot ignore the public mood. The right thing. That is the defining difference between Russia's mafia state legacy and Ukraine's democratic trajectory. Caolan is right for three reasons. First, because the very visibility of the scandal proves that the system functions. In many countries, including Russia, corruption of this scale would never reach daylight. Investigations would be blocked, protesters arrested, journalists silenced. In Ukraine, thousands took to the streets in July when Parliament attempted to weaken the NABU and SAPU. Zelensky was forced to retreat. Institutions that Ukrainians fought for on the Maidan have acquired genuine autonomy, and now they are holding the political elite to account, even in wartime. In the summer, citizens camped outside Parliament demanding the restoration of anti-corruption agencies' independence. They won, and today those same agencies are exposing a network of bribery that implicates ministers, deputy prime ministers, government advisors, and a former business partner of the president. A system that can investigate itself at the worst moment of national crisis is demonstrating maturity, not fragility. Second, Ukraine's public reaction reveals a political culture fundamentally incompatible with authoritarianism. Robertson's interviews show the anger of ordinary Ukrainians. Anger not because corruption exists, it exists everywhere, but because it offends the sense of civic dignity. These are people who froze on the Maidan in 2014 to remove a president who treated the state as personal property. They grew up under the detritus of Soviet rule and refused to accept a repetition of that pattern. They recognize that corruption is a disease inherited from a predecessor state that operated on patronage and theft. But they also understand that sunlight is the cure. And as one protester put it, if you hear something about corruption, it means the system is beginning to work. Fever is a symptom of healing. That is not naivety, it's civic realism. Third, the scandal is proof of a free society even under martial law. Robertson films openly in the center of Kyiv, criticizing the government and interviewing citizens who do the same. There's no knock on the door, no detention, no nervous glances to the side. That alone is a powerful comparison with Russia, where even mild criticism of state policy can end in prison. Ukraine's commitment to transparency, however inconsistent, remains fundamentally intact. It is the reason the EU granted candidate status. It is why this scandal matters politically, because Ukrainians expect better, because the state must behave as a European state if it wants European membership. This expectation is not a luxury Ukraine can postpone until after the war. It's part of what Ukrainians are fighting for: sovereignty, freedom, and a state that serves its citizens rather than exploits them. Zelensky's opponents will attempt to exploit this moment. Western donors will raise questions, defense procurement scandals, including allegations about firepoint and privileged exemptions. These things are deeply damaging in a country that depends on external support for survival. And it's true that corruption has already cost Ukraine time, money, and perhaps even lives on the front line. But the central point remains. The scandal is not evidence that Ukraine is doomed. It is evidence that Ukrainians demand accountability, enforce accountability, and publish wrongdoing, even in the middle of a war for national survival. That is the behavior of a democratic nation in the making, not a state in collapse. Russia's propagandists claim this proves Ukraine is corrupt. They miss the essential truth. In Russia, corruption is protected. In Ukraine, it is exposed. In Russia, the corrupt are promoted. In Ukraine, they flee. And that is why Caolan's argument matters. He is documenting a society that refuses to look away, a society that refuses to accept the cynicism of its past, a society that understands that victory is not merely territorial but moral. Ukrainians are fighting for a state where theft is punishable, where power is accountable, and where a president can be challenged by his own citizens in public. It's a painful story, but it's an honest story, and in Ukraine, honesty must be a sign of strength.